Hello, hello, and welcome back. We have made it all the way to the very last module. Congratulations, we're here. If you have skipped ahead to this module, that's actually okay. If you've made a few pieces in some of the earlier modules and you want to just have them finished so that you can start wearing them or giving them away or selling them or whatever you're doing with your pieces, I understand how eager sometimes it is. So I just wanted to talk about why we do some finishing to start with. And then I want to talk about what the finishing process actually is, what's actually happening, because I really want you to understand what's happening. And then in the next video, I'll actually take you through all the steps and show them to you. But to start with, why do we tarnish? Well, when I look at some of these pieces here, you know, this is my unfinished piece that we made in our video. When I look at this, the first thing I see is the wire around the outside, which, okay, we did spend a lot of time on that, and we do want that to be noticeable. But, you know, when I learned to wire wrap, it's because I really want to show off the stones, okay? And that doesn't mean that I don't want to show off my work and my wire wrapping, but when I look at this one, I actually notice the stone first and the wire wrapping second. But then when I do notice the wire wrapping, because I've got all these like super light, high, shiny bits and these super dark bits underneath, the weave really comes out, and you can actually see my work a lot more on the tarnish piece than you can. This one just kind of looks like a jumble of wires. There's wires everywhere. You can't really tell what's going in and out and what. But with these dark and light spots, it's really obvious which wire is coming over top. And this just looks like a much nicer, more finished weave. And that's the case with a lot of these weaves, okay? Like this is just kind of a jumble of wire, and yes, it's nice, but the highlights and the more extreme contrast that the finishing gives just actually brings out the wire work more when your eye does finally settle on it, okay? So that's my 2 cents as to why. Another reason why you might want to start thinking about finishing your jewelry in this way is because the lifetime of your jewelry is going to be more consistent, okay? By antiquing this piece, we have fully tarnished all of this wire, and then we come back and we clean up the high sides, which are going to remain a little bit shinier because of just regular wear. We'll keep these high spots shiny, okay? If it sits in your drawer for a long time or in a display cabinet, that's maybe not the case, and even those high spots will start to get a little bit duller and tarnish. But if you're wearing this on a daily basis, those high spots will continue to remain shiny and bright, and you get this lovely contrast in your piece. And by taking it through all of the stages of the antiquing it, bringing it back, it means that they're not going to get a piece like this and have the whole thing tarnish on them and slowly tarnish and slowly change color, and then they never know what color it is when they put it on in the morning because it's different from yesterday. And sometimes, especially with sterling silver, the silver goes through different colors of tarnishing, which I'll show you in the next video. But sterling silver kind of starts to go almost a little bit brassy, and then a little bit coppery, and then it goes through some metallic stages before it actually turns like a charcoal black. Whereas copper kind of just gets darker and darker and darker until it gets black. And then we come back and we clean those high sides up. So that's another reason why you want to do your tarnishing, is because it's just going to make the life of your jewelry more consistent, and if you have paying customers, they're just going to be a lot happier with that. It's also a good test to make sure that you don't have any bits sticking out that are going to catch, because we do go over them fairly vigorously when we do our finishing steps. But you can just see how much the actual work comes out. There, we'll get it to focus with the antiquing, and how much nicer of a color it turns out. I really prefer that darker color. Even with the tree here, I didn't really get close to this. This is a sterling silver tree and a copper one, so there's a little bit of a difference. But in the sterling silver one, you see all the dark lines between every single wire to really bring out like the grain in that tree. Whereas before it's tarnished, it's just kind of a big jumble, and you don't have that definition between the wires. So that's why we tarnish. What do we use to tarnish? Well, here I've got my big ugly bag. This is my liver of sulfur. This is the gel format. They do sell liver of sulfur in different formats. You can get it solid, you can get it pre-mixed as a liquid. This gel actually has the longest shelf life, so this is what I would recommend buying if you have the option. And I'll show you how to mix this up tomorrow. This is what is going to antique our pieces. So, for a long time, this whole process confused me a little bit, because what does that actually mean? Well, it's oxidizing the silver. Well, what does oxidizing mean? So oxidization is something that can happen to a lot of different atoms, a lot of different molecules. Atoms, I think, is the word that I'm looking for. My science degree is not 100% up to snuff, I will fully admit. So I am going to try and explain this in a way that we can all understand, because that's what I needed to understand in order to get this whole process. When an atom oxidizes, it basically, when you look at your atom, in the middle you've got your protons and your electrons, your protons and your neutrons. Your protons have a positive charge, your neutrons are neutral, and your electrons are orbiting around the outside, and they're the negative charge that balances out the positive charge in the middle of your atom, okay? When an atom oxidizes, the air around it actually steals away some of those electrons that are orbiting around the outside of the molecule. What does that actually mean? It means that atom changes from one form into another, and different atoms change into different things when this happens to them. So for example, fruit can actually oxidize. So when you take a bite out of an apple and it starts to turn brown, that is oxidization. But when it happens to an apple, that's what happens to it, is it turns brown. When steel oxidizes, it turns to rust, okay? And when silver, copper, or brass oxidizes, it tarnishes. It turns into this almost black tarnish layer. Okay, and so what's happening is that the atom, the silver or copper atom, is physically transforming into tarnish. So you are losing silver or copper or whatever your metal is every time it tarnishes. Now, we're talking atoms here, so a very small amount, but you do lose it. In order to get rid of tarnish, you actually have to take a polishing cloth to this and clean that tarnish away, revealing the silver underneath. Okay, so that needs to be something that you understand about oxidization, that you're actually losing atoms when they oxidize. Now, different atoms have different properties. So like when steel turns to rust, that rust tends to flake off and actually starts to reveal the molecules underneath, so that they can then in turn rust. And if you've ever had an old vehicle, you know what I'm talking about, that steel will just rust and rust and rust until there's nothing left of it. Whereas, I don't know if you've ever watched an avocado oxidize, but it will actually, like if you cut an avocado in half and you leave the pit in, and you just use the half without the pit, and you eat that for lunch, and then you leave the other half just on the counter with the pit in, that green around the pit will oxidize, and it will actually form an airtight barrier so that the fruit underneath will keep. So you can come back to that avocado a week later, and you just have to take that top layer of oxidized avocado off. You don't need any plastic wrap, you don't need any food covering. You will have perfectly fresh, nice avocado right underneath of that layer. So that's the cool thing about oxidization. Believe it or not, silver and copper actually oxidizes a little more like fruit than it does steel. And what I mean by that is when it forms this layer of tarnish on top of the surface of your piece of silver or copper, that tarnish actually creates an airtight layer that protects the silver underneath. Okay, so when we do this, and we've got all these pieces inside here that are black, you can barely see them, they're so black. That metal under there is totally protected. It's fully tarnished, and it cannot continue to tarnish anymore. These high spots can, but these low spots that are already black, they are fully tarnished. They will not continue to tarnish. It's the tarnishing process, especially with copper, that tends to turn people green. Copper is one of the things they use in Ayurvedic medicine in order to test your acidity level in your body. So they use like a copper bracelet to see how green you turn as an indication to how acidic your body is, and then they make adjustments to your diet accordingly. So copper is kind of a cool metal that way, because it does react to an acidic body. So that's my crash course on oxidization. I hope that's fairly clear. I hope you understand what is happening. It's actually changing those atoms on the surface of your wires and changing them into tarnish. And then we're coming back afterwards and we're cleaning those high sides back down to the metal underneath of the tarnish to make the shiny. And that's how you get this extreme contrast between bright and dark, which just brings out all your wire work and really enhances your piece. I do want to just quickly go over some of the tools we will be using in the next class. These are a couple of little files. This is a needle file and this is a half round file. This one has a flat side and a half round side, and this one only has teeth on one side and there's no teeth along the edges or back. These are probably the two files that I use the most on this type of jewelry. And when and why do I use these files? Well, let's say I was working and I got a tool mark in one of my wires and there's a scrape all the way up here. There isn't, but just pretend there is. Well, I could bring my file in and I could come in and I could file those wires until they were down below. So by filing, I'm actually removing material. And we're removing material until it's down below those scratch marks, which totally will eliminate any scratch marks or tool marks or anything like that. Or if you do have a wire end, I mean, I tend to not whenever possible, but if you do have a wire end, you can like round it out and make it less sharp with a file. Okay, so you want to do your filing before you do any of your antiquing liver of sulfur process. So that's one of the things we'll need, but that's just to clean up any sharp spots before we start. Another thing that we will need, besides the liver of sulfur, of course, is steel wool. Now this isn't just any steel wool, this is 0000, which is the finest steel wool that you can get. It comes out this is just a little piece that I ripped off. I tend to rip this apart because once it's wet, it will rust and basically disintegrate. As we learned, because it's oxidizing. So I usually just rip off a piece of this dry, whatever I need for, depending on how much I have to tarnish. So we'll talk about that again tomorrow. A little bit of dish soap and some steel shot, which I will show you tomorrow. I don't have any of that down here, which is not 100% mandatory. You don't need the steel shot. You can do the final polishing stage with like a toothbrush or something. It's mostly to get rid of these bits of steel wool that can get caught in here. But you do need to do one final stage after the steel wool. Again, we'll cover that tomorrow. So you can either use like a toothbrush or a tumbler, depending on what you have available or your budget or how many pieces you're doing. If you only need to do a couple pieces, then, you know, by all means, you don't need a $200 tumbler. But if you plan on producing pieces, then you're going to see in the next video how much time a tumbler is going to save you. So I hope that was clear. This is the liver of sulfur. I will cover any more details tomorrow in the next video. So I hope you enjoyed that. Have a great day.